and somebody yelled out, "Go home, Canadian." We're talking about invasion of their country and aliens in their country.
Says all contributed to their decision not to return, ending a 15-year tradition of coming each winter to Florida.
For decades, Florida had a golden goose. 60,000 Canadian families flocking south each year, pouring billions into local businesses, clinics, and neighborhoods. Then politicians, chasing headline-grabbing toughness, slammed the door on their #1 moneymaker. Within months, snowbirds sold their condos, communities emptied, and a staggering $6.6 billion simply vanished. Was this economic suicide a calculated risk or a catastrophic miscalculation? The trust was broken in an instant, but the full fallout was something nobody was prepared to witness. Mike and Marianne Jeffries spent 15 winters in Sarasota, carving out a second life beneath the Florida sun. Their condo was more than an escape from Canadian winters. It was a promise of community, routine, and belonging. Each November, they packed up from Moncton and drove south, ready for 6 months of familiar faces and easy warmth. But by early 2025, the atmosphere had changed. The Jeffries started noticing the shift at the community clubhouse. A friend, another Canadian, was told to "Go home, Canadian" during a group class, not as a joke, but as a warning. The language in the air had turned brittle. Conversations that used to revolve around golf scores and grandkids now veered toward politics, border rules, and who really belonged. Mike described it as a slow tightening, a sense that being Canadian was now a problem to be managed instead of a neighbor. The new registration rules, fingerprinting, paperwork, the threat of fines, felt like a message written in red ink. You're not one of us. The language that's being touted around politically here is somewhat frightening, Mike said, not just as Canadians, but for what you see happening in the community you've come to love. It wasn't just policy. It was the way people looked at their license plate in the grocery store lot. The way a neighbor, once friendly, now asked pointed questions about how long they planned to stay. The little things started piling up. Marianne tried to brush it off, but by March, even she admitted it felt different. "We'll miss it here," she said. "We've made incredible friends." But the feeling of being unwelcome had crept in, persistent and exhausting. Packing up the Sarasota condo for the last time felt like closing a chapter they'd never planned to end. Mike handed their keys to the realtor, knowing the market was flooded with other Canadian sellers. The Jeffries weren't alone. At the clubhouse, the goodbyes came in clusters. Some neighbors were angry, others resigned. Most just looked tired. That kind of language leads to a mindset that says it's okay to behave a certain way against people, Mike said. We've seen it with visible minorities, and now we're starting to see it again with Canadians. The drive north was quiet. No radio, just the hum of the highway. 15 years of memories boxed up in the back seat. The Jeffries left behind more than a condo. They left behind trust, routine, and the idea that Florida was a place that wanted them. For families like theirs, the decision wasn't about politics or economics anymore. It was about dignity. Once that was gone, there was nothing left to stay for. Florida's winter economy operated on a simple principle: reliable seasonal residents who spent substantial money over extended stays generated revenue streams that sustained entire communities through off-peak months. Canadian snowbirds epitomized this model, arriving in November, staying through March, integrating into local communities while maintaining properties year-round. Their presence wasn't a bonus, it was the backbone. Each year, more than 60,000 Canadians made the migration, transforming condos and quiet neighborhoods into bustling enclaves of activity. The numbers behind this symbiosis are staggering. Canadian snowbirds didn't just fill hotel rooms, they bought homes, hired local contractors, and paid property taxes 12 months at a time. A typical household spent anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000 during a 6-month stay, money that flowed directly into restaurants, golf courses, medical clinics, and small businesses from Sarasota to Fort Myers. Contractors lined up winter projects months in advance, knowing Canadian clients would fund roof repairs, kitchen remodels, and landscaping upgrades that kept local crews employed through the slow season. Healthcare providers built entire practices around snowbird schedules, offering everything from routine checkups to elective surgeries and dental work that Canadians planned during their time in the sun. The ripple effect extended to every corner of the local economy. Grocers, pharmacies, car dealerships, even church bake sales counted on Canadian attendance and spending. Politicians in Tallahassee saw this economic engine as a given. The DeSantis administration floated plans to shift the state's tax burden away from homesteaders, relying instead on tourist taxes and out-of-state property owners, especially Canadians. The logic was simple: let visitors subsidize Floridians and everyone wins. But this approach missed the point. Canadian snowbirds weren't tourists passing through, they were seasonal residents who invested in the community, returned year after year, and expected to be treated as neighbors, not as cash cows. Early warning signs flashed as political rhetoric hardened. The talk shifted from welcoming retirees to scrutinizing foreign property ownership and tightening visa rules. For the first time, Canadians faced background checks, fingerprinting, and threats of fines for overstaying. The message was clear: Florida's golden goose was now under suspicion. The economic partnership that had taken decades to build stood on shaky ground, and the people who once anchored the winter economy began to question whether their investment and their welcome still mattered. The numbers behind Florida's economic self-sabotage don't require interpretation. They speak for themselves. $6.6 billion in annual Canadian spending disappeared almost overnight. That's not a forecast. That's what vanished from Florida's economy in less than 6 months. The property tax windfall Tallahassee took for granted? Gone. $2.1 billion in yearly revenue evaporated as Canadian owners dumped condos and homes onto a market already drowning in listings. The collapse didn't stop at real estate. Healthcare providers, once thriving on snowbird procedures and winter checkups, lost 60% of their seasonal patient volume. Dental clinics, elective surgery centers, specialist offices, entire practices built around Canadian snowbirds faced empty appointment books. The economic arteries feeding local hospitals and clinics constricted, cutting off lifeblood from communities that had planned for a busy winter. Construction and maintenance crews who relied on Canadian clients for steady winter contracts reported a 70% drop in bookings. Projects that would have kept roofers, painters, and landscapers working through the slow season evaporated. Small businesses that once counted on a predictable flow of work found themselves chasing scraps or closing shop altogether. The fallout rippled through every layer of the service economy. Airlines cut 40% of their seasonal routes between Canada and Florida. Regional airports designed for winter surges sat half empty. Car rental agencies, expecting fleets to cycle through Canadian hands, watched vehicles gather dust on sun-baked lots. Hotels, restaurants, and retail stores saw their off-season safety net shredded, with winter employment opportunities vanishing as their primary customer base disappeared. Restaurants in snowbird-heavy neighborhoods reported double-digit revenue declines. Retailers who stocked Canadian-friendly goods slashed orders. Even local charities and community groups who once counted on snowbird donations and volunteer hours faced shortfalls. No spin, no distraction, just raw economic carnage. The numbers don't need a narrative. They're the story. Billions lost, thousands of jobs erased, and the foundation of Florida's winter economy reduced to a cautionary tale of political arrogance and economic amnesia. The numbers only hint at the chaos. For people whose livelihoods depended on Canadian snowbirds, the reality is more brutal than any spreadsheet. Tony Mancuso, a Sarasota restaurateur, watched his dining room shrink from a winter crowd to scattered regulars. He ran the numbers every Sunday night, down 40% from last year, with February, once his busiest month, now quieter than August. "We built this place for the Canadians, he said. They were our lunch crowd, our happy hour, our Friday fish fry. Now I'm sending staff home by 7 p.m. Mancuso's story repeats up and down the Gulf Coast. The condo he bought in 2012, once a sure bet, is now just another listing in a market flooded with Canadian sellers. He joined a WhatsApp group for owners trying to unload properties. The chat fills with price drops, stories of buyers walking away, and the same closing advice: cut your losses, get out. You're not going to rent it, you're not going to sell it for what you paid, Mancuso said. You just want to stop the bleeding. For contractors, the winter season used to mean back-to-back jobs, kitchen remodels, roof repairs, pool upgrades, all bankrolled by snowbird clients. Now, phones barely ring. One contractor in Naples summed it up. "One Canadian family would keep my whole crew working all winter. Now I'm lucky to get a call for a leaky faucet." He's laid off 3 workers since January. The rest pick up odd jobs, hoping for a turnaround that never comes. Realtors, usually the first to sense a shift, have been overwhelmed. Listings from Canadian owners pile up. The calls aren't about buying, they're about liquidating. "I've never had this many Canadian listings at once," said a Clearwater agent. "They're not testing the market. They're done. They're liquidating." The emotional cost cuts deeper than the financial one. Business owners who once planned their year around the snowbird season now talk about survival, not growth. Friendships built over decades end with rushed goodbyes and the hope that maybe someday things will feel normal again. But for many, the trust is gone. As Mancuso put it, "You can rebuild a roof. You can't rebuild a relationship once it's been trashed." Governor Ron DeSantis stood at the podium, grinning as he brushed off the numbers. "Who would want to be in Canada in the winter or spring when you could be in Florida?" He quipped, waving off the loss of hundreds of thousands of Canadian visitors as little more than a rounding error. The state's official line was simple: Florida didn't need Canada. Canadians, on the other hand, needed Florida's beaches, its sunshine, its tax breaks. Behind closed doors, the mood was less celebratory. Internal memos circulated through the governor's office, stamped confidential, warning of a $2.1 billion property tax shortfall and a $6.6 billion hole in annual spending. Local mayors sent desperate emails to Tallahassee. "We are losing our winter base. Businesses are already closing." The reply? A form letter about American resilience and the promise of new markets. At the Capitol, lawmakers pushed forward with Senate Bill 264, restricting foreign property ownership. The bill's sponsors called it a matter of state security, but the practical effect was immediate. More Canadian owners listed their condos and buyers vanished. Realtors called it economic arson. For every press conference touting strength, another business owner filed for bankruptcy. Tony Mancuso, the restaurateur who'd already sent staff home early, joined a coalition of business owners pleading for a policy reversal. They delivered a petition with 2,000 signatures to the governor's office. The response was a press release about protecting Floridians from foreign influence. "We begged officials to reverse course, but politics mattered more than our livelihoods," Mancuso said. "They'd rather score points on cable news than save our jobs." The official story never changed. DeSantis repeated his line about Canadian tourists subsidizing Floridians. Legislative aides privately called it a disaster, but the public face was defiance. Each new restriction, each new soundbite drove another wedge between Florida and the people who once called it their second home. The numbers kept falling, the rhetoric kept rising. In Tallahassee, politicians toasted symbolic victories. Across the state, communities counted the cost. Portugal wasted no time. Within weeks of Florida's legislative crackdown, Lisbon's tourism board launched targeted ads across Ontario and Quebec. The message was simple: retire in a country where you're wanted. Billboards in Toronto's Pearson Airport promised sun, affordable healthcare, and a visa process that didn't treat Canadians like criminals. Portuguese banks even rolled out English-language mortgage products for foreign retirees, advertising zero penalty for early withdrawal. The D7 residency visa, once a bureaucratic maze, became a selling point. Show proof of income, buy health insurance, and you're in. Mexico followed suit. Canadian expats in Merida and Puerto Vallarta posted videos walking through the easy online residency application, boasting about medical costs a third of Florida's. Real estate agents in Playa del Carmen offered winter rental discounts for Canadians who could show a canceled Florida lease. The shift wasn't theoretical. Canadian travel agencies reported a 40% spike in Portugal bookings, and Mexican consulates saw a surge in long-stay visa appointments. For couples like Owen and Leanne from Hamilton, the decision felt overdue. After one winter in Lagos, Portugal, they called friends back in Sarasota to say they'd found better food, friendlier neighbors, and a sense of welcome they hadn't felt in years. "We realized we should have left Florida ages ago," Owen said. "Here, people are happy to have us." Florida's loss had already become someone else's gain. Replacing a Canadian snowbird is not a numbers game Florida can win. Each household poured an average of $33,000 into the local economy over a 6-month stay, money that paid for renovations, medical care, groceries, and tax bills. The average U.S. tourist spends $1,200 per week, and most are gone in days. To match the spending of just one Canadian family, Florida would need 28 American families cycling through every winter. No amount of Instagram campaigns or domestic travel deals can fill the void left by a single snowbird household that actually lived, invested, and hired locally. The math exposes the fantasy of a quick rebound. Arizona, which once boasted its own winter influx, is already seeing warning signs in Phoenix and Tucson. The lesson is brutal in its simplicity. When trust is broken, money and community don't return on demand. Economies built on relationships cannot be patched together with short-term visitors and wishful thinking. Recovery, if it comes, will be measured in decades, not seasons. In just 6 months, Florida lost $6.6 billion in Canadian spending and $2.1 billion in property tax revenue. Numbers confirmed by state economic reports and real estate filings. Decades of trust built by over 60,000 annual Canadian visitors collapsed after hostile rhetoric, restrictive laws, and ignored pleas from local businesses. Leaked government memos show officials privately acknowledged the crisis, even as public statements dismissed it. While competitor countries like Portugal and Mexico welcomed Canadian retirees, Florida's lawmakers advanced further restrictions, deepening the exodus. The true long-term cost remains unknown. How many communities will recover, and how much of the lost investment can ever return? What is clear in the evidence is this: once a state's most loyal partners are driven out, no amount of domestic tourism can fill the void. Florida's downfall is now studied as a cautionary tale for policymakers everywhere. Break trust and you risk erasing prosperity built over generations.